A deployer deploys a hotspot, sees traffic, gets paid for that traffic, and says, hey, I could put more hotspots in more of these kinds of places, more places that have a lot of foot traffic. And that flywheel is working, and that flywheel is driving more people to do deployments.
You could see somewhere like LATAM or Mexico, the idea of giving them tokens that they could swap for stable coins for use cases like remittances. It could be a totally different ballgame down there.
Why is the foundation doing a $50 million grant? It's because we want to enable more deployments. Why are we trying to do this sort of BYOD, bring your own device sort of program? We've enabled existing hardware to be on the Helium network because we want more coverage. Having a coupon effectively that just turns a hardware into a revenue generating piece of hardware is the idea of the welcome back. I'm actually pretty excited about this, and we're going to keep iterating on this. I would not expect it to be in prod for at least several weeks, if not a month or two.
Hey everyone, welcome to the very first episode of the High Signal podcast brought to you by us at Helium. So I'm Sam Lewis from the Helium Foundation, and sort of the goal with this podcast is going to be to sort of educate everyone about what's been going on with Helium, the latest and greatest, and eventually venture into some other things like what's going on the rest of DePIN, as well as get some deployers on and really get into the weeds on what makes this whole thing go. And so for episode 1, we're going to focus on doing a full deep dive into Helium itself. And who better to have on than the man, the myth, the legend, Abhay Kumar, head of protocol at Helium. I don't even know if it's still head of protocol. I think you've done had a million different titles. But Abhay, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, man. It's great to do this, and very blessed to be the first one to start this journey with you.
The first victim of many. Yeah. I've said this a lot, but I think a bunch of people have had an experience with Helium at many different sort of moments in time. So I was hoping you'd just lead us off by giving us a quick overview of what is the Helium network for newcomers, and sort of in layman's term, like why does Helium even matter?
The best way I like to explain what Helium is for folks that are completely new, I mean, like, how do I explain this to my grandmother, basically, right? Is Helium is a way for us to have better connectivity, one that is in the hands of the people that are actually providing that access. So, my phone, my like tracker on my keychain, all these things need a way to connect back to the internet, and the options for connectivity aren't always perfect, and there aren't a lot of options out there that are maybe available to folks. And Helium enables any individual to be able to support and create a network for those kinds of devices. So, I can run my own cell tower, right? Essentially. And what that allows me to do is provide connectivity for myself and for my neighbors, or maybe if I run a business, for my customers. So that's what Helium's all about. And obviously I start diving in from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll get into a little bit about who's sort of like leveraging the network in a bit, but it's really impressive. Like, I think the first half of 2025 has felt like an inflection point for Helium when you just go by the statistics. So, for example, for those who have been paying attention on the mobile side, around 97,000 hotspots. I think last week on a Saturday just had over 1.1 million daily active users on that side of the network, pushing 35 gigabytes or terabytes of data. Gigabytes wouldn't be great. And then the largest ubiquitous IoT network in the world. So I'm curious, like, what do you think have been the biggest unlocks recently? And I know more of it's on the mobile side, but what do you think it really has been that's sort of like unlocked this growth?
I think the mobile network has really been pushed by an increase in sort of useful coverage and aligning coverage to where people actually are. And this isn't just Helium mobile customers. So yes, you could get a cell phone plan and start to use this network in addition to other networks that are around. It's also the fact that other networks, other carriers can also use this network as well. And so there's sort of a sort of multiplying effect. Like, if you put a hotspot in a very, very high traffic area that has not only Helium customers, but also AT&T customers, for example, it is going to be used. And there's a very tight feedback loop that happens there. A deployer deploys a hotspot, sees traffic, gets paid for that traffic, and says, hey, I could put more hotspots in more of these kinds of places, more places that have a lot of foot traffic. And that flywheel is working. And that flywheel is driving more people to do deployments. I mean, we see this all the time on Twitter, on Discord, and in other venues, people just sort of showing off their awesome new deploys. And those are the things that are driving, not only the DAU numbers that are sort of the output metric, I would say, but also the sort of the input metric of more hotspots being sold, more hotspots being onboarded, more like existing hardware being converted. Like that's another, I think, great part of the story. All of these things are sort of leading to this sort of massive growth in the numbers around users and coverage and data transfer.
Yeah, I was actually curious. It was actually my next question, which was like, when you're sort of sitting there monitoring the health of the network, there's obviously inputs and outputs, but like, what are the first numbers you go to on a weekly basis for network health?
Yeah, I mean, I look at DAUs first, even though it's technically an output metric. I think it really shows the sort of active health of the network, in a way. And although we don't yet have sort of public versions of the DAU numbers on an hourly basis, I think we have a general sense of what these can look like. And but then looking at it on a daily basis sort of gives you a sense like the fact that the weekends are always a lot busier, and then you sort of dive in and see where those users are coming from. They are places where regular humans like you and me will go visit on the weekend because we're at work during the week. Right? We have day jobs. We don't have time to go necessarily to those coffee shops or to the movie theaters or the malls or the gyms always on the weekdays. And so like those are the places where we're seeing those sort of weekend traffic. And you know earlier on in the year, I was always like, oh man, I wish Monday was as good as Sunday. But the reality is that there's a very seasonal, sort of cyclic, sort of pattern here. And looking at these numbers week over week really sort of show you the growth.
I know it's exciting. I always get so jealous of folks on the West Coast because I'm always asleep when the Saturday night high DAU number comes out, and you guys catch it before me, for sure. And yeah, no, it's been fascinating to watch. I mean, even weeks like this, though, like it's a super great week so far. Like you see, Tuesday and Wednesday starting to stack up against prior week Saturdays, and the growth is awesome. And then for people who aren't like as well versed, we keep talking about these hotspots in doing deployments, or they're hearing about Helium for the first time. What are the different ways that they can get involved in terms of options for deploying?
Yeah. So the simplest way, if you have nothing, if all you have is maybe just you have like wired internet to your store. The simplest way is to buy a hotspot and put it like in the back, like sort of shelf behind where your point of sale is. Right. That's where a lot of your customers are probably waiting, and that's where a lot of your customers. It probably points at most of the tables in your store or in your cafe. And if you put a hotspot there that you purchase, you can provide coverage for every single customer that's sort of in that area. So that's one simple way to sort of get on board. Another way folks can get on board is if you already have existing wireless infrastructure. Let's say you have like a carrier grade like Ruckus or a Ubiquity Wi-Fi AP that someone else in your store installed for you, or some vendor installed for you. You can have them upgrade it with a very small software change. Like if they configure the APs themselves, they might be able to do it themselves, or if they have like a third party vendor that did it for them. Like it's a pretty small change, and then all those docs are on Helium docs, and they can convert existing infrastructure. They don't need to actually buy new hardware to participate in the Helium network. Both of those, I would recommend either of those options actually at this point, because they're both pretty widely available.
The brownfield, which is what you're referring to with reconfiguring existing access points, is like super exciting for me. That's how I see this growing to another order of magnitude faster than it would have. So super cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much wireless infrastructure already existing in venues. I was joking on X the other day about there's these new Ubiquity indoor kind of panel like U7 radios that are made for like large stadiums. And my joke was like, I have a bounty for you. And I think you responded to me. It's like, so do I.
I know. I got a little jealous. You were stamping on my Grant thunder there, which we'll talk about grants at the end of this. But yeah, I wanted that one. But no, certainly a ton of opportunities. And just for the audience, if this is your first time, please come check out our Discord. There's so many helpful deployers. It's a really really fun community. People have done things like schools, stadiums, hotels, all these really really interesting places where they've been able to help their communities and earn while doing so. So all good stuff. I wanted to shift gears quickly. So we talked a little bit about the sort of building the network piece and sort of state of Helium with metrics today. Wanted to talk a little bit more like the demand side, right? So, when Helium on the mobile side first started, it was a little bit of, so we're going to build it. And, you guys dog fooded it a little bit with your own carrier, Helium Mobile, which is an MVNO that gets nationwide coverage with T-Mobile when it's not in the range of Helium hotspots. But talk a little bit today, just in broad strokes, about the state of carrier offload and sort of, who you can mention and why you think it's so compelling to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Carrier offload, let's sort of explain what it is first and how it works. So the way carrier offload works is if you have, let's say you're an AT&T subscriber, and we'll use those as the example here in the United States. All phones that, in general, like regardless of what service you have, when you go home, your phone usually probably instantly connects to the Wi-Fi network at home. And the reason that works is because the phone sort of has a variety of radios, and it actually prefers Wi-Fi, especially if it's a very very strong signal. It prefers that because Apple and Android have sort of realized that the thing that most users want, especially when they're in Wi-Fi settings, they're probably like not going to move around a lot. They're probably going to sit down. They're probably going to do a lot of high bandwidth traffic. And so connecting to the highest bandwidth capable signal that you have is probably the right thing at that point, right? So, I'm sitting on my couch and I'm streaming, the game, right? That's often what happens. And so that particular switching is the technology of carrier offload, especially for the Helium network, right? The fact that, we happen to use Wi-Fi as a protocol, but like the user doesn't really need to think about this. The phone automatically recognizes these hotspots that are sort of broadcasting a hidden signal. It's connecting using the SIM for authentication, the SIM that's already on the phone. And it's sort of saying, hey, I'm this subscriber, please allow me to connect. And then the hotspot is able to do that negotiation, connect to, in this case, AT&T servers, and decide that, yes, it's allowed to connect to this network. And what happens at that point is now the user has no idea, that the device and the subscriber has no idea, unless they look in the top corner of their phone and it shows the little Wi-Fi symbol instead of the typical like cellular symbol. What's actually kind of interesting here, and a lot of Android users like to make fun of iOS users here, is that Android's always ahead on a technology perspective, and Android is actually trying to go and hide the fact that you might be connected to Wi-Fi over LTE or maybe even satellite. Like,
Which
that
makes
is
sense,
not.
kind of.
It totally makes sense, right? As an average user, I don't necessarily care what I'm connected to. I just
Yeah,
want to
at
know that I'm
all.
connected. Like, I just want to know I have the best connectivity, and I always want
Totally.
the best connectivity that's available to me. I don't want to know that I have two SIMs or one SIM. I don't want to know if I have Wi-Fi or LTE or 5G or 12G or whatever the people like us come up with. Like, that's our job to worry about, right? But ultimately, like, that is that's not a user concern. The user just wants to be connected, and so that's what happens. Carrier offload is using existing technology in a kind of a new way to allow AT&T subscribers to connect to this Helium network, and that's it. The relationship at that point is for the subscriber is still with AT&T. They're still paying AT&T for services, and AT&T has to go figure out how to provide the best network for its subscribers. And so now we'll go to, like, what is carrier offload, right? So the state of the world for carrier offload is Nova Labs, the Helium mobile entity, has relationships with a variety of carriers, AT&T being one of them, and other sort of infrastructure partners. And because of that, all of those subscribers from those other networks are able to, we used the word roaming in the past. It's kind of like that. It's very similar in that you're able to sort of roam or use this other network. And from the subscriber perspective, as I said, doesn't matter. Now, what AT&T does there is that it, pays for these services, and Nova has to burn AT&T. And when it burns AT&T, the network gets paid. The hotspot owners get paid. And so that's what happens. That's the sort of nitty gritty of what carrier offload is.
When you first went in to sort of like talk to an AT&T or a Telefonica down in Mexico, did they sort of like scratch their head and be like, what is this? Or is this just an extension of sort of the type of thing they've been doing for additional offload?
They've had some versions of this in the past. There isn't, at least up to today, there isn't as large of a network. And I think that's the reality of what our community has been able to do, is it's been able to very, very quickly build, 90, almost 100,000 node network for these carriers to be able to offload onto. That is unique and interesting to them. And, the more, this is really just comes back to it. I look at DAU numbers first, but that's an output metric of more coverage being created, right? The coverage being created directly, and sort of enabled for carrier offload directly affects the DAU numbers. So yeah, like I think it's such an enormous network, and but it could be so much bigger than what it is today. An order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude bigger. These carriers will happily offload onto these networks because we provide a lower cost option for them to provide a better service for their customers.
Yeah, absolutely. My next question was going to be like, do you think like they indefinitely want you to continue to cover these gaps that aren't cost efficient for them to do themselves, like for the next order of magnitude or two? But it sounds like that is the case, which is awesome.
I mean, ultimately, they have to solve a physics problem, right? And why I sort of call it that is that it's, high bandwidth communications typically require a lot of density, and much shorter range, because you just can't have both things. Like you could have a sub gigahertz spectrum providing incredibly wide coverage to, you can put up a radio that has like, can support 800 users over 20 kilometers or whatever, in the sub gigahertz range, but you certainly can't provide a high bandwidth connectivity at that range, at least not yet. We haven't figured out how to break physics yet, but I think that, like, I think what we'll see over the years, I'm incredibly excited to see what happens with satellite, and incredibly excited to see sort of what happens with some of the other technologies that are being thought about, at least on the terrestrial side. But ultimately, like, carrier offload will be the way that we like sort of solve this like high bandwidth 5G problem. And I think that'll be crucial. And why right now? It's because the demand is there right now.
Yeah, it is interesting, like looking out and thinking about, like, I think Amir was calling it the wireless I think a bunch of people call it like the wireless convergence, where it's like the future of connectivity is just a bunch of these different technologies, like serving the best need at the, like you've obviously got Starlink doing a bunch of stuff in certain open areas, but that's not as good of an option in, indoor bars or restaurants. And it'll be interesting to see how it all comes together for sure. In terms of like the demand side and how you think about expansion 1 year, 2 years from now. Right now, you're obviously working with AT&T in the US and some others, and have a partnership with Movistar Telefonica down in Mexico. I'm curious, how do you think about juggling, hey, there's like this massive opportunity here in the United States and we have so much work to do here, versus, wow, there's so many other countries with a different set of problems and needs across the world. I really want to just get a foothold in all of them. I'm curious, I guess, to condense the question, what are the first things you would look for when evaluating that type of opportunity?
I mean, I would say that we are open to expanding to every country in the world that wants to have this kind of service. Let's just start with that. Like, I think it is, if we find the right opportunities, we need to make sure that we have the team to back it up. I'm not going to say that we should like go hire 100 BD people to go like work on every single, or 180 BD people to work on every single country that are out there. That doesn't make any sense to me. But certainly, like, I'm putting my time in, and I know other people on the team, both the foundation and at Nova Labs are putting their time into making sure that we have that we're able to at least evaluate every one of these sort of opportunities. And the way that I look at some of these, the way that I personally look at some of these activities is one, can we solve a problem, right? Is there a problem where our kind of offload offering can actually enhance an existing carrier's sort of connectivity and their services to their customers, or is there room for a brand new kind of carrier to exist that starts from the ground up, right? So basically, both of the offerings, like what is Helium? Helium provides two things today, right? It offers this offload sort of network that enables existing carriers to expand their coverage options, and it allows for new kinds of carriers to be built, right? And so those are the and so both of those things are the kinds of like offerings that we can go to a new country and say, is there room for this? Is there an appetite for this? And notice that the two things one thing I didn't say in there at all was crypto, right? Like,
Right.
it doesn't necessarily have to be a country that thinks about crypto first. One of the things that we certainly found out in the US here is that a crypto first carrier isn't a way to acquire customers and past a certain stage, right? There is a certain like sort of echo chamber where we sort of obviously love the crypto side of it, and we see it as an enabler for building these kinds of networks, but but the average consumer might not care. It certainly doesn't in the United States. But there are countries out there where that crypto might actually be relevant, and so yeah, it really really depends on the country. And so when I look at places like Mexico, I see it as a test case for what other parts of LATAM could be. It also gives us a little bit of information about what other regions could also be. But I think we learn as we sort of enter into a market, right? What we do in Mexico won't work in South Korea and won't work in Singapore, and won't work in Dubai, won't work in Eastern Europe, like all of and none of that will work in Africa, right? We have to sort of solve each one of those problems differently. So, I would say, yes, obviously we are focused on the United States and on Mexico right now because we see the opportunity. We've sort of already at least in the US, we know what it takes to get to the next level here, and we're going to execute on that vision. But then, we're going to look at the other countries, and if we want to double down in any of these places, I think we sort of build the team locally to be able to do that.
Totally agree, and I also agree on your carrier, Helium Mobile. I was one of the early adopters who sort of loved when you earn the crypto for sharing your anonymized location, but totally agree. You guys have grown to almost, I think 300. You're about to hit 300,000 total paid signups, and I know the bulk of that is when you sort of inverted that and started offering what are called cloud points, which instead of giving subscribers tokens for sort of mapping the network on their phone, you switched it to something that was more understandable in the US. And then sort of going back to your point about other places potentially needing other things, you could see somewhere like LATAM or Mexico, sort of the idea of giving them tokens that they could swap for stable coins or use for use cases like remittances. It could be a totally different ballgame down there. So totally agree. Have one more interesting sort of question along the lines of Helium Mobile, the carrier. So I don't think we've really talked about it yet, other than a couple brief words from you, but sort of the way that the Helium flywheel works is that you as a hotspot owner put up a hotspot, and then you earn tokens for one, providing sort of proof that you're covering that area, and second, for any data transfer that comes through your hotspot. And carriers who want to offload via the hotspots have to burn HNT in order to use the network. Nova Labs has recently on our Helium Explorer, which you can find at world.helium.com, has started listing the revenue from the mobile carrier alongside some of the revenue that comes from data burn. I'm curious, like, why you guys did this. And, I heard Amir talk on a couple podcasts in the past week or two, and I've seen some tweets on X or posts on X. Is there sort of an idea that you guys could potentially do something to marry what's happening with the network in terms of revenue and what's happening with the carrier?
Yeah, I think, the obvious reason here is that, or at least obvious to us reason here, but I think it's showing the data credit burn, I think, is a really important part. And that's something that you can do. You could go into Dune, you can actually, if you want to get really deep, you can follow the Solana chain and actually see the burns directly. Like there are lots of ways to do this, but I don't think it sort of totally gives a picture of what the revenue opportunity is for that is actually being sort of realized on that's sort of enabled by the Helium network. And I think that's the part that we really want to show, and allow Helium to be seen as enabling businesses, and that's what crypto enabled businesses. I think Helium is probably the perfect example of one of these things, and I've certainly heard a lot of other people outside of the Helium ecosystem say, like, if I want to tell people about crypto enabled businesses, I tell people about Helium, right? And so we want to give those folks the ability to show, with real numbers, like what is the actual revenue that's coming, that is being enabled by this network, right? So yeah, like as you said, on World, like there's a monthly number right now. It's monthly. I'd love to get a lot more granular, weekly, daily, even. But the reality is, mobile subscribers only pay once a month,
Yeah,
and third parties who pay us to sort of buy data on the network on their subscribers' behalf, like AT&T, are settling to us, and the carriers, depending on the carrier relationship, it could be net 30, net 60, net 90 terms, right?
totally.
This is all like kind of being obfuscated for the hotspot perspective, like they're from the deployer perspective. But looking at a monthly number at least gives you a directional sense of where we are. And I think that's what we're hoping to be able to share with anyone that goes to world.helium.com. And that's, I think that was the intention. And then that's hopefully what people are getting out of it.
Want to switch gears one more time and just talk a little bit more about sort of the technical aspects of your role. So obviously you do a bunch of stuff on the protocol side. Curious, like what's been most exciting for you in that area recently, or what you're excited to work on the next 12 months that we can look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, the most exciting thing for me in the last few months, is sort of our migration back to AT&T. I think is maybe I mean, I think it was the greatest simplification that we could have done given where we are at the network, right? And I think I mean, I think you met even over a year ago, you were probably in the community sort of being like, hey, like, come on, like we're this is getting really hard to explain to people. You're absolutely right. And I will sort of for a moment touch on the reason for the multi-token model. Really, it was around enabling multiple networks and sort of enabling the concept of a network of networks. But I think the reality is, like, we have the network that we should be thinking about. Certainly the network that's driving the revenue, and the sort of the fact that we have this focus on wireless, and we're very, very that is where our expertise lies. And so, falling back to AT&T, sort of rolling back to AT&T, and giving, IoT and mobile the sort of the economic advantages to sort of be able to be folded back into AT&T. Those are, I think that it was the right choice. And certainly, if it ever makes sense in the future to have multiple networks, like, we should have a conversation and see what, or even if we should ever think about that. I think we're probably really well committed now onto our path. And I don't know if it makes sense to ever change that again. But it was, there was a time where there was a thought that we could expand to different kinds of networks. We had, a proposal for an energy network to be built on top of Helium. We had other proposals as well, sort of in the wings, and we needed an economic solution to dealing with that. But the truth is, like, doubling down on what we're really good at, I think was the right call. So that was sort of the most exciting thing in the last few months, and all the sort of things that came from it. We cleaned up a lot of the protocol. We were able to make things simpler. We've cleaned up governance quite a bit. We're sort of putting up front, and giving people more tools to understand, what does it mean to actually delegate and stake and all those kinds of things. All of those things, I think, are the sort of key initiatives on the protocol side that I think have led us to where we are today. At this point, I think a lot of the things that we do now really should be focused more, less on what I would call core protocol, like core economics, and probably like more on the edges until we sort of figure out some more things over the next year and really get through the happening. I think the network would probably be, we change a lot, which is okay. But I think waiting through the halvening probably makes sense for a little bit. But there are some things that we're working on around the edges. So there's certainly, one thing that we've sort of been playing around with, and you'll see. I don't. If you look at the source code, or you look at some of the changes that we're making in the source code or in PRs, if you're diving that deep, you kind of see something around a welcome pack. It's an experiment. And the idea is that, we have this concept, non-chain concept called a welcome pack that we're sort of playing around with. The idea is that it's an onboarded and asserted hotspot, right? Like know, uh, this is assuming that you already know where something's going to be deployed. It sort of comes with, it's this NFT that comes with the hotspot. It already has a reward split associated with it. It already has, either have like a dynamic receiver or a hard coded address, like sort of baked into it, maybe some small amount of SOL that's associated with, so it can run transactions. But effectively, it's like an intent for a deployment. And this is a little bit on the edges, and this is actually the first time I've ever talked about this stuff outside of the core team. So let's call this the announcement of the announcement here.
Yeah. I saw somebody sleuthing in the side Discord. Your source code's been found, but first
I mean,
formal announcement.
this is we build in public, right? And that's a good
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly.
And so I have no issues, obviously no issues with it being found. But that's the concept. Like the idea is that, we want to make sure that we want to enable onboarding, right? Like, why is the foundation doing a $15 million grant? It's because we want to enable more deployments. Why are we trying to do this sort of BYOD, bring your own device sort of program, to enable existing hardware to be on the Helium network? Because we want more coverage, right? So what are the other things when talking to deployers, when talking to large scale deployers, like, and maybe new buyers of hotspots, what are the things that make it hard to deploy? And one of it's just like all the crypto bits and the on-chain bits.
Totally.
So like having a coupon effectively that just turns a hardware into a revenue generating piece of hardware, like, is the idea of the welcome back. And so I'm actually pretty excited about this. And we're going to keep iterating on this. I would not expect it to be in prod, for at least several weeks, if not a month or two, because I think we need to sort of think through the edges and think through the UX a little bit. And then that's the other thing, like, how do we improve the UX around deploying hotspots, managing hotspots, fleets of hotspots? As you've probably noticed, we've built a bunch of automation. I didn't mention that about the things that I'm excited about the protocol. We built a bunch of automation around the protocol itself, and rewards claiming and things like that, and voting even. How do we bring more automation to the city deployment experience? That is something that we're spending a lot of time on. And although that's us as a protocol team, it's obviously with the network team that's sort of building this coverage.
That's awesome that you guys are doing that sort of on the technical side. Totally agree. Like, coverage priority number one. In fact, one of the things I'm going to attack next sort of is more educational materials on the just sort of social side of getting started. I think people that have been in the community for a long time take for granted, taking that first step to go speak to a bar owner, understand how you're going to sort of portray Helium, how to, come to an agreement with them. It can be harder than people think. So tying all these things together, I think will be awesome. All right. You ready for just 4 quick lightning round questions?
Sure.
Favorite moment working at Helium since you've started?
Oh man.
Singular moment.
Favorite singular moment working at Helium. I think my favorite singular moment working at Helium, and this is going to be a surprising answer, was actually our sort of over day outage that we had November many years ago. And it sort of it'll tell you something more about me than anything, which is that although it was hard, it was like we were sleepless. It created a lot of uncertainty in the network. And this is back when we had our own L1. For me, day 2, 3, T3, T4 from that moment was really the moment that I realized that we don't need to be a blockchain team, and we really should be a wireless network team. It gave me a tremendous amount of clarity. And so, people ask, like, what made you migrate from the Helium L1 to Solana. And that was the moment. That was when
Interesting.
I truly realized, although that we were solving some incredibly hard and really, really interesting technical challenges. I mean, I'm an engineer. I love that stuff. Um, I realized that we needed to solve the product problem at that moment. And so
Good
that's
answer.
like, it was just a clarifying moment for me.
Most underrated project in DPIN and why?
This is a funny one. I think so. I met this team that was building, and I don't know what happened to them now. So like, I actually feel very uh, like very ignorant here. But I met this team that was building a decentralized way of manufacturing biological reagents for things like pharmaceutical design. And this is over a year ago, and now you just reminded me that I should go figure out what happened to them. But one of the so I a lot of people don't know this about me, but I spent a bunch of time prior to software engineering working in the biological sciences side. I was going to be a researcher doing genetics research, and one of the
Oh, wow.
hardest problems is like you sort of put together these molecules like DNA. Like, here's a sequence, I want that created, or I want to have like my PCR reagents or something like that, and then you sort of put in this order, and the next day you get this like FedEx, and which is pretty cool if you think about it. Like, I want
Yeah,
this
it's
like
incredible.
30 base pair sequence like made for me, and I want a vial of it, and I can get it tomorrow. That's actually pretty cool. But that is not, readily available all over the world, and certainly not available for like large molecules, like things that you might, sort of reagents that you might use for your experiments. And that is a bottleneck for things like some things that are very practical, like drug discovery or design and things like that, or even sort of molecule discovery and design. And so there was this company, or there's this team that was trying to build this. And I think that's super underrated, because I think this is that sort of crossover. So like, Helium is that crossover between crypto and connectivity. I think something like that could be the crossover between crypto, incentive driven, sort of building of networks, and healthcare. And I think that's super underrated.
What's the name?
I don't remember. I feel really bad about this now. And if I was more prepared for this, I would have this for you.
And by the way, we've tremendously butchered the concept of a lightning round by going into multi-paragraph. Cool. Last one. Top summer plans.
We just came back from Portugal, and that was a
Oh,
pretty awesome
nice.
plan. We had a great trip, and it was, yeah, it was a great time with the family.
Wait, where'd you go? I was just there like 2.5 weeks ago in Comporta and Lisbon.
I hope you didn't get swallowed alive by mosquitoes in Comporta.
I actually
I've
did
heard.
not.
I've heard. No, we were in the Algarve. We were in Alentejo and in Lisbon.
Abhay, want to say thanks for coming on and kicking us off. Just a couple of call to actions before we sort of log off here. So I'd encourage listeners to get involved in the Helium network in any way you can. Deploy a hotspot, sign up for Helium Mobile. If you are interested in deploying hotspots, we did just announce a $50 million grant initiative that you can find on helium.com/grant. So we'd love to have you in the Discord. We'll be back in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be talking to Dylan Bain from Masari to do a little bit of a deep in tokenomics, more super nerdy deep dive then. But yeah, thanks, Abhay.
No, thank you for having me. And this is a lot of fun. Cheers, Sam.